Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I wanted to talk a little bit about asking why you got rejected. I had somebody just email me, and this isn't someone I had worked with before, but unfortunately he is out of the race already. What happened was he only applied to 4 sites and has received 4 rejections. And that's kind of one of those mistakes that, looking in hindsight, that you wouldn't have applied to only 4 spots. But again, it's all new. It's the first time you've applied to residency. Give some grace that you just didn't understand the process. And I get that it's tough. So let's talk about asking about what it is that caused your rejection. So there's a great post up on Reddit about getting some feedback from that, and some of the posters actually shared the feedback. And so the first site, you got feedback from 2 of the sites. The first one was that they didn't have enough clinical rotations or intern experience and enough leadership positions for the place. And what they're able to do is simply just go to their rubric and say, okay, well, they need X number of clinical rotations, X number of intern experience, and that's likely working at a hospital, and then leadership position, vice president or president, or that there's a leadership position at all. The other one saw that the letter of intent didn't show he was really interested, and admitted that this was one that was a last minute application, and it was pretty clear to both resident to be and residency site that not a lot of time went into it, and that was pretty easy. And this is something that unfortunately happens a lot, where out of exhaustion you kind of just push send just to get it in by the deadline, but you weren't able to put your best effort into it. And so the feedback was that on the one case they're not qualified because of the number of rotations, the experience, and the leadership. And wouldn't this have been great in P2 year to find these things out, so that in P3 year they could schedule the intern experiences, and P3 year they could take those leadership positions, so they would be qualified. So again, this kind of lag measure comes a little bit after the fact. Okay. Another posting talks about applying to some of the more difficult sites where it's not that you're not good, it's that you're not great. What people take is they take it personally that they are not great, but it's really the experiences that you've had are not great. So instead of being president, maybe you were treasurer. Instead of getting 5 clinical rotations, you had 2. Instead of having a national poster, you had a regional poster. And it's simply that at this particular site, usually academic medical centers, which are in phase 2, which I'll talk about in a little bit, unfortunately, with the number of applications, 200, 300 at this particular site, that level of CV, unfortunately, will not get the interview placement. But here's where I disagree. One poster put up that they feel it is unfair and there should be a cap on the number of places that you can apply to. And in a previous episode, the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, I talked to a physician applicant, or a medical school applicant. So Nathan Gartland applied to 37 medical schools. And this is something that you guys likely haven't had to do, because the data shows you haven't had to do it. The data show that the average pharmacy school applicant, back when you went into pharmacy school, only applied to 2 schools, and that the acceptance rate was somewhere around 82, 83%. The acceptance rate is now at 89%. So pharmacy students have not experienced rejection in the way that medical students have. So this process is a completely different process. That person that applied to 4 places applied to twice as many places than likely they had applied to pharmacy schools, and that's twice as much. So Nathan Gartland had applied to 37 schools because he really wanted to become a physician. And he had no idea how his record would be taken, and that was something that had to be done. So it's episode 414, PharmD to MD, a success story, if you want to kind of go back to that one. But let's kind of get back to this idea of rejection and having applications. So let's say that you do have the money to apply to 30 places. That means that you have to have the time to create 30 applications. And I can hear some of you groaning already like, oh my gosh, that is so much time. And some schools you might have that because you have that week off and your school has made it so that it's a lot easier for you to apply. But most of you wouldn't. Still, 4, if you're looking at the bell curve, 4 is way on the low end. 12, 11 is right in the middle. And then once you start getting over 20, you're now at the other side of the tail. But I disagree with this putting a cap on it, because to afford to send that many, and someone did the math, is saving $30 a month for 3 years. And you can send 30 applications. So if you want to send 30 applications and it means that much to you and you have the time to do 30 applications, so be it. But we get into this whole thing of equity. And the equity really comes in PGY2, and there's another posting about this, but if you go into PGY2, and I have the numbers, but only, and this is tough to wrap your head around mathematically, but 30 sites represent 1/2 of the phase 2 placements. I'm not talking about interviews, the placements. So let me say that again. 30 pharmacy schools earn 50% of the placements, and 115 schools earn the other 15%, or the other half of the placements. And that's in line with Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the residency sites are going to get 80% of the applications. 20% of the students are going to get 80% of the interview invitations. And so, it's like there's going to be some students, and this happened last year, some student had 18 interviews and had to reject some of them. And what's happening is that their credentials are way on top. And the thing is that they can only accept one position. They can't accept 18 positions. So in the end, it really doesn't affect anyone, because although they were ranked higher, they still are going to, 17 of those sites are still going to go to the other rankings. So that a person gets 30, interviews, yeah, it takes an interview spot from the very last person that would have gotten an interview, but the very last person that would have gotten an interview is the least likely to actually get the position. So I don't agree with putting any kind of limits on it. I do think that it's a lot. It's a little over $40 to do an application. You can get it residency. You can get pharmacy school applications for free now. They'll give you a waiver, and I think it only costs like $75 to apply to an entire pharmacy school. This isn't a single residency site. So I think the issue is much more on the end of how much it costs to apply, and to some extent there are expenses that go along with being an applicant and all of that stuff. But I'm guessing that number 43 or 48 or whatever it is there actually to limit the number, because they don't want people applying to many, many sites. So if they had made it $10, for example, it would be out of control with the number of applications. So that number is something that they tweak up and down based on how few or how many applications they actually want. So they go into a huge kind of thing about, some people are busy and they've got all these families and all these other expenses, and it's just unfair. But I think we need to get back to the big reason that most people will get a rejection. And one of the posters puts that on here, is that it is a misalignment between the candidate interests and the program strengths. Okay. So it's not that the letters of recommendation really make a huge impact, although if you get anything less than highly recommend, and 80% of the time it's highly recommend, then it comes down to the letter. And in many cases, what students did is they overrided what the letter was telling them. So as you're writing the letter and you're realizing that, wow, I don't actually match to this place, but I'm going to send the letter anyway, you didn't say, wait a minute, this letter is not true. I really don't match here. I need to pick another place. And that's what should have happened. But a lot of times it doesn't, because just under the duress of everything, look, I just want to go here. I know I'd be great. I don't match exactly, but you actually, if you had actually taken the feedback, which is what the letter was saying, and in hindsight, you'll see this, that's what you should have done. Is just said, okay, you know what, I don't match, by taking the time to write a thoughtful letter, to look at their residency rotations and the rotations that you've done, and seeing how that there was a misalignment, you should have gone to a different one. So that's a lesson for phase 2, that you're really looking for alignment, over acceptance to something that you think that you should be going to. So another post, rejections getting you down. This was kind of some of the advice I see here is kind of like, you go get them. It's, no matter what happens, it's a win. If you got a residency, great. You're on the way to a clinical career. And if you don't, well, you can go to graduate school, or you can make lots of money and maybe try again. And, I get that, the residency is not the end, but in some ways it's the kind of sour grapes that, the story where I think it was a fox or something like that saw some grapes and he couldn't reach it. So he said, oh, the grapes are probably sour. And so you say, well, I wanted residency, but it probably would have been really tough. And now I'm going to make much more money with this community position that I got an offer for. So, bah humbug, I don't want residency. But I think that what we really want to do is kind of transition now to what we can do with the feedback that we get or don't get from the residency sites about our applications. And now we can move on to phase 2. And so I created a phase 2 cover letter course, and it has some of the content of the Extreme LOI Makeover, but I'm calling it cover letter because you can apply to residencies, or you can start applying to clinical positions. And you say, but I didn't get the residency, now I can't apply to clinical positions. But on this posting, you'll see that somebody applied to a site that needed a PGY1, but they got it anyway. And you're like, well, how can that be? Well, in some cases, PGY1 is what they hope for, but it's something that you can learn over time. And you can, especially if you're in kind of a focused area, maybe one area of ambulatory care or one area of the hospital, you can start to pick it up. And it takes a lot of time, and you don't have the direction that would have made it a lot easier with a residency. But there are those kinds of positions. So whether you're trying for a cover letter for a clinical position or a hospital position or even a community position, or you do want that LOI makeover, what I like to do is, as soon as you find out that you're kind of out of the game, to sign up for the course. And then what we do is we rewrite your letter so that you can kind of see the process. And that way, when we get to what is the madness of phase 2 week, then it's 24 hours. I'll get the letter back to you as soon as you figure out where you want to apply. And that process is a week-long process to apply. And it's completely on steroids. Everything happens so fast. And you have to get things done really quickly. So I provide that 24-hour turnaround. But I want to talk to you before that week, because it is absolute madness when that happens. Now, 1,600 of the 8,000 that are going to apply this year, and maybe it'll be lower, but 1,600 will know before that time, and I'd like to talk to you beforehand. 1,600 will know ahead of time, and then 2,400 will find out on the day. So 2,400 will find out in March that they didn't get a residency and that they want to do phase 2. So it'll be 4,000 altogether, about one half of what was applying. We'll find out. And I have a limit, unfortunately, on the number of people that I can help because it is during spring break, and I think it's right during APHA. So it's kind of bad timing on their part for you guys that are trying to get some things done. But if you have a spring break, which I don't know that I remember having during APPEs, but if you have a spring break, obviously, it's nice to have that time. But you basically have a weekend to get all this done. So do communicate with me. It's residency.teachable.com/P/phase 2, or you can find it at the residency.teachable.com site. And what do I talk about in this phase 2 thing? And I'll talk more about it. Oops. Let's get to the actual course. The big thing is the phase 2 email template that's available to anybody. And then understanding your pharmacy school match statistics. I put a clinical position cover letter here as well. So if you're kind of thinking of a clinical position and you're wondering why you're not hearing back, I can help you with those. But the first thing is I talked with the Lux pharmacist, who's very popular on Instagram, and was on the cover of some pharmacy magazine. It was quite a big deal. And she goes through her process and the 4 sites that she applied to in phase 2. And then Key Gales, who matched in phase 2, not only for PGY1, for PGY2, he also talked about it as well. And then kind of a bunch of things to do as you kind of understand the interview offer and timeline, how to rank things. And then I'll send you a phase 2 book. And let me pop that up. Called Crushing the Phase 2 Pharmacy Residency Match, Proven Tactics to Earn a Clinical Pharmacist Training Position. It's book 5 in the Pharmacist Residency and Career Series. And there are some things that you can do. I have helped over a dozen people get phase 2 and in some academic medical centers. Those are available. They've said, this is the group that we're willing to accept. And then, if phase 2 comes, phase 2 comes, and we'll get somebody there. So again, I just, rejection is hard, and you should first ask why you were rejected to find out what's going on, and you want to give yourself some grace. This is the first time you've ever tried this process, so you can do it better in phase 2 or at worst in next year. But I do want to help you with phase 2 if that's something that you come to. So give me an email, tonythepharmacist@gmail.com or residency.teachable.com, and we'll get it started. And I think that talking to someone, and usually professors it's sometimes tough to talk to professors because you feel embarrassed. And it's like, let me just talk to somebody that's outside of the school so I don't have to kind of deal with that kind of emotion. And I'll give you a ton of grace that it's a bit unfair that you go from a process where you have a 90% acceptance where it comes to pharmacy schools to a place where the acceptance rate is much, much lower, much closer to what it is for medical school admissions. But just give me an email and I can kind of start getting you through the process. Or if you have gotten some rejections and you just kind of want a little bit of a positive pep talk, give me an email and I'll talk to you about some things that you can do. And again, no judgment at all. I just want to help you through this process.